So, hi, I'm Emma Stewart. I'm here to talk about something I called fear versus physics. I now have a fear of AV services, so, here we are. I have got nice pictures that I explain here of what I am. I'm an electrical engineer. I've been doing this about 20 years. I have worked in power systems across multiple countries. Right now, I work for Idaho National Lab. I'm the chief power grid scientist. But my education, I'm one of those people that did a PhD in electrical engineering, so don't judge me. But I also have a master's in electrical mechanical. But I've worked at a few national labs. I've done things like instant response for the electric grid for about 20 years at this point. If you could see the picture, I have a picture of me from 20 years ago when I worked in my first utility job. And I worked there before the time where PPE actually fit women. So I look ridiculous, but I know, at least I was relatively safe. But I've been in power grid my whole career. This talk was actually born out of quite a bit of frustration with the, the cyber community. I've worked again in power for a long time. Over the last probably 2 or 3 years, there's been a number of fairly major power systems events, one in particular that happened in Spain quite recently, where there was a massive blackout across the country. The first thing that happened was social media kicking up saying, it's definitely a cyber attack. It wasn't, so, I don't believe it was. I can tell what happened from physics. So that's really what this talk is born of, then there's good pictures of what happened. Sorry, apparently it is being recorded and the slides will show up in there. But yeah, that's what this is really about. So, current state of the future grid, or a current state of the US grid and the future grid. The US is a really massive interconnected system. We have about 3,000 utilities for the electric sector. There's about 26,000 generators in our network and about 500,000 miles of transmission in our system. It is a massive interconnected system that does lots of different pieces that work together to make us actually have power every day. It's actually relatively reliable. People like to say we're having these big problems, but in the grand scheme of things in the world, the US grid is actually one of the most reliable ones you will still have. We are very lucky to have our lights go on every day, charge our phones and do all those things. It's changing. The large spinning machines are starting to become solid state devices, distributed controls, communications. We do have outages. We also have really weird misinformation things that happen during every outage. There was one recently in Texas where they said there was potentially a surprise sunset, which was really confusing because the sun goes down normally in a predictable way. But that's... People like to say the things nowadays on the media and tend to ignore the other things that are happening. So again, we're also in the future about to have some insane load growth in our system. They're looking at 100 gigawatts in various states in the near future. I've jokingly been using the term in terms of sizes of Scotland as well. So, and even in Virginia state, they're looking at about 6 times the size of Scotland being connected to their grid in the next 5 to 10 years as well. And that's somewhat ridiculous. Hence the accent. I'm half Scottish, half American, if that helps. So what actually causes the lights to go out in this country? When the lights go out, what happens? And in most countries, because animals are pretty much the same. They might be a little more dangerous in Australia, but they kind of look the same. We have never had a US-based cyber attack that caused the lights to go out in this country. Not once. It's not happened. But we have had, in the last year, a woman climbing on a transformer that caused 800 homes to lose power because they decided not to electrocute her. We've got people that steal copper. We have squirrels. We've got to say the super squirrel thing. Squirrels are still one of the leading causes of our power going out. We also yesterday had someone, I think it was a bird carrying a fish, dropped a fish onto the power line, and that caused an outage as well. So, when we talk about what actually happens on the system, the truth is often weirder than an actual cyber attack as well. Other things, weather knocks down systems. I've got some really great pictures of these here, just so you're jealous of what I've got up here. Weather knocks down things all the time. You might see things laying on the ground during a storm. There's some good pictures here of just distribution lines sideways laying on the ground in any town, and people are like, oh, why is my power out? The line's on the ground. So, and also fires. Equipment ages. Transformers, I'll talk about this shortly, but transformers are one of the primary connecting building blocks of our entire system. They are very flammable. So, they go on fire quite a bit, and that's one big thing that happens. So the picture I have on here is talking about what happened in the Iberian Peninsula. April 28th, there was a huge outage across the whole of Spain and Portugal, essentially. Over about a period of a minute and a half, the whole grid went down, which is an exceptional event to happen. Losing power in a whole country is actually kind of a big deal. But the breaking news that came out April 28th, people panicking, power's out. The first thing that happened was, if you ever look at LinkedIn, about 94 people I know posted that was probably a cyber attack. And I was like, wait, what? And they're like, no, it was probably cyber. How do you know that? So I started to, if I would describe what's on my screen, it was a number of LinkedIn posts, Twitter posts, different things going on of well-known people saying, this is probably a cyber attack. Also, you should buy my product to stop this in the future, which was, super fun. The other part that happened is people started to panic because of that. People did hear it, and they started to have this impression of something like movies you see where they're not going to have power for 3 days. Not that the utility was working out what was happening, and they were going to restart the grid in the next few hours. So they were definitely panicked. Also, apparently the British, there was a funny report that lots of British people go on vacation to the south of Spain. There was a whole report that they were surviving on beer and biscuits, and that just sounded terrible. But the quote I saw was, everyone's saying it's a Russian cyber attack. It's quite worrying. We're all mums and need to contact our families. So that was a kind of a strange one as well. But, people were panicking. So I've got a timeline here on what happened, what the actual series of events that went into this happening. It was a known thing that has happened between multiple countries before. It was a mistake that this actually happened. So around between 9 a.m. in the morning on the 28th and noon, there was some early warning signs that I called the canary in the coal mine, that something was wrong in the system. What they do in the morning on a grid, they plan for dispatching generators on the system. They were looking how to dispatch the system, and they did a certain amount of dispatch, which is how much the generators are spinning and how much power they'll be providing. But in that morning period, there was a forecast mistake somewhere, and the generators weren't dispatched properly. During the morning, you start to see these abnormal voltage fluctuations happening as well. The voltage was bouncing up and down all over the system. It tripped off a number of things from the solar side. There's a lot of people with houses with solar on them that were tripping on and off during the morning. That was one of the first indications for someone like, but the solar tripped off. Is that a cyber attack? No, it was the voltage. So, but they had a light load, and then there was this oscillation around between 12 and 12:30. They started to see oscillations, which are essentially the power wiggling around on the system in a particular way. And multiple of these were detected, and the voltage was rising. So France and Spain are connected together. France saw these oscillations and said, nah, we're out, and disconnected the system from them. They didn't disconnect Spain, though. They disconnected one line that was connected to Spain, mostly for two reasons. One, it was to protect themselves from that event from happening. And on the other side, it was also, when they disconnect that line, they could provide damping to that oscillation. So maybe they could calm down Spain and make the system move forward. It's a technique we've used in this country multiple times. You disconnect a line, it changes one of the parts of the configuration of the system, the damping then happens. But because they didn't have the generators dispatched properly, it didn't damp, it got worse and started to oscillate out of control. After that point, around 12:32, that was when the system collapsed. Essentially, when things are moving around too much, the nuclear generators in particular do a thing called scram, which is essentially they all completely stop working, partially because we would like them to not be destroyed. When the control system of a nuclear plant starts wiggling around, it's not good for the plant at all. We don't want it destroyed, we want to restart it. So they scrammed their generators, and that led to the protection systems across the whole country operating one by one until there was the full blackout. Sorry, I'm hearing a cough from the side. So around 12:34, and this happened over a period of 2 minutes, the entirety of Spain was tripped offline. It happens that quickly. It's not a thing that's happening over a 4-hour period. It's a 2-minute event type thing. So following that, I'm trying to describe the slides in words here. I'm trying, man. But following that event around 1:30 in the afternoon, they actually started to restart the system. And so this is one of the stories I wanted to be in here, is that was actually a success. They knew what to do after they tripped the whole network. They knew how to start restarting it bit by bit. It just takes a while. And so they started up what they're called their blackstart plants, which are plants that can start spinning on the system without the need for any other external generation or a connection. They were then used to build the building blocks of the system up until they're back and they're reconnected. So between 1:30 and 4 p.m., they started building up the network again. And then by 4 a.m. on April 29th, everybody had power again. They got the lights back on, the system was operating. while people were panicking, that was only a 16-hour period. In comparison, in the US, it took us a couple of days, I believe, to get Texas back online properly. So they only had 16 hours, but because of the panic that was happening, there was essentially people, not looting, but they were draining the stores of all of the stuff that they could get because they were convinced they were going to be out for days. I'm unclear why people wouldn't just leave at that point, given it's Europe and they're not an island. But, there was a bit of a panic going on. What actually happened? Well, in the power system, we have generation and capacity. It has to be matched at all times. Generation and capacity were just not matched. They weren't able to meet together. Generation and load were just not matched together. But we also have to balance that for the sake of voltage and frequency control. They went too far down one side. They couldn't bounce the system back to the other side, and then things went offline. We do that on purpose. The system, the lights going out on the system is actually a thing that is good. It's a thing to protect the generators and the other equipment and the power electronics. You'd prefer them not to be broken, essentially. So when the lights go out, people are often like, that's terrible. This is the worst case scenario. It shouldn't be. It's actually the worst case scenario is the lights stay on and things burn up. So in the root cause analysis of this, two big questions I got from people that are cybersecurity professionals. I am one of those cybersecurity professionals, but people were asking these two particular questions of where did the oscillation come from was the first one, because oscillation sounds like a terrible thing. And also, why did all the solar trip? And so oscillations are interesting. They are what they say on the tin. They're an oscillation. There's something shaking around on the system in a periodic fashion. If you look at the power grid, in particular, if you think about how you're driving your car, the wheels are like the generators of the system. When you hit a big speed bump in the road, or a hole in the road, you can knock off the balance of your tires. You'll start driving and you either are getting a flat tire or your steering wheel starts shaking around. You want to pull over at that point and not break your car. So that's really what an oscillation is doing to the electric grid. You want the grid to pull over and fix what it's doing at that point. It's triggered by a system change, and if it's not damped, it leads to protection going down the system, like I said. But it's used to protect the generators, the bulk system, and our ability to restore the system. I'm wondering if I'll eventually get slides. Interesting point on oscillations is people like to think it's one thing happening that causes this giant oscillation. It's not. It's rotor angles interfering with each other, weak ties between areas, other forces, and also weather. So I know you're all very smart, but I don't think we can control the weather just yet. I'm wondering what's happening. I can see it changing, and I'm hoping. But you can't really control the weather at this point, no matter what was said on the news recently. We're not really causing weather controls, and temperature is actually something that causes variations in our electric grid quite severely. So temperature is one of the things that can contribute to an oscillation. So one of the news reports was basically saying somebody tripped one thing offline with cybersecurity, a cyber attack, and that caused the entire thing. That's not the case. So the other thing that this is almost impossible to talk about without a picture was people were saying the solar in the people's homes had tripped offline all at the same time. And there was some relatively intelligent conversations going on about that. But they were like, well, it was before the event, what happened? So in the olden days of my job, I used to work for a utility. And when they would get phone calls about people like Bessie down the road, her solar has tripped offline, what's happening? Usually it'd be something, it would say something like high voltage warning and trip. That's really what happened. They had a voltage variation that caused it to all trip at the same time. It did what it was meant to. It did how it trips offline and came back online. So this is what I'm saying about the physics. We can explain most of this through physics if we just have the conversation, but the screaming on the cyber caused lots of other problems. So lesson learned, what actually went wrong? Physics went wrong, that's it. Physics did what it's meant to, but physics went wrong. A bad dispatch, loss of voltage control. We had some pretty big resilience failures there, partially because they also lost communications for lots of locations. The communications towers went down as well. Poor communication and PR. If you ever want to see a sort of masterclass in communication during an outage, there's a utility in South Carolina that lost all of their power during there was a large transformer was shot up by someone. They lost all the power to about 47,000 customers. They were told it was going to be days or weeks before they actually get their power back to this whole city because they had one tie line. And instead of panicking, they went and built a new tie line. They took about 12 hours to go and just build 2 miles of line so they could get to another substation so that they could restart their own grid. It was great to watch because there's a really cool video that you can get online of what they did. But the masterclass was actually their CEO who got online and basically told everyone exactly what they were doing, what it meant, and how long it would be. And instead of, something that occasionally happens, like, shooting at people who are trying to restore your grid, which also happens, the community actually came out and it became more of a community event. They were feeding the line workers, they were helping people, and it was actually like a class in how to communicate during an event and not cause mass panic, which is what happened in Spain. There was mass panic because of the news. So let's learn what went right. The blackstart went right. It was great. The fact that it actually started in 16 hours is a success. So when you want to blackstart a system, it goes from assess what's happened, what's broken, what do we need to fix? And then they go through a process of the blackstart generators. And like I said, they put together piece by piece until you have a whole system back together. They did that in 16 hours, which was actually impressive. Like I said, Texas goes offline quite a bit. But sorry, Texas, if you're from Texas, I apologize. I know there's multiple people here that are from Texas. It's got better, so we're on the same page. It's not just one time, though. This is not just one event where everyone did this. My job also involves responding to news stories, unfortunately, every so often. In the last few months, there was one about rogue hardware and Chinese inverters that could trigger the worst blackout threat to date. Interestingly, one of the things in that article they were talking about was called a kill switch. It made it sound way more dramatic when you call it a kill switch than a rapid shutdown device that's required by the National Electric Code. So basically, they'd found these things. Oldsmar was a famous water event where about not a year ago, it was a long time ago, but they told everyone that was a cyber attack on our water system and they poisoned the water. And then about a year ago, they said, no, that was a human error. Oh, okay. People still use that in their presentations all the time. London, there was a massive transformer failure, which was on fire. Everyone again said Russian cyber attack was one of the bigger things, or Chinese. Nope, it was too moist. So I said moist in my presentations, now I'm proud. But since I don't have slides, I had to make it funny. Old transformer, it was a planning failure. Heathrow lost power, and that was a big deal for Heathrow. Heathrow hadn't planned for knowing that they had 2 other substations that they could have switched over to and kept the planes flying and the airport going. Again, it was a planning failure. And my last one is in the last week, there have been 17 news stories that went from vulnerability to massive power grid outage to buy my product, funnily enough, because DEF CON, Black Hat, and B-Sides were all happening at the same time. So about 17 news stories in the news saying that could happen as well, which is drastic. So just some last undeniable truths about the power grid. And I still don't have slides, but I'll still keep talking because Chris has taken a picture at the back of this. Thank you. So turning off the grid is a defense mechanism. We do it for lots of different reasons. If you live in California, they also do it often it's called a power safety shutoff, so it doesn't go on fire. It's a defense mechanism and often the intended action. Our power systems operate in a way that turning them off is often the intended action. Just because it can happen, it doesn't mean a cyber attack can cause it. Let's hold that. It can happen. It can happen for reasons of physics. It doesn't mean you can cause it with a cyber attack. So all models are wrong, some are useful. Our grid is modeled all over the place. Sometimes it's wrong, sometimes it's right. We deal with that. You can't actually model a cyber event, though, without accounting for protection and system configuration. Another one people like to say is, I think it was an electric vehicle one recently where people were if we charge all the vehicles at exactly the same time, it will blow up a transformer. We have fuses. It's great. Everything's a fuse if you try hard enough. And also, instant investigations don't really start with an assumed trigger. We don't usually sit and go, that was definitely a cyber event. No, we usually, when we're doing root cause analysis, you start with trying to find the root cause. You don't just say it. So that's an undeniable truth. We do actually have some major cyber concerns going on. My concern is some of this work, when you hear people yelling that this was that and that was that, it distracts everyone. The number of phone calls I've had to deal with in the past couple months about the rogue Chinese inverters has been a thing, because apparently I gave a presentation here last year on Chinese inverters. So apparently I know lots and people call me about it. But in the last couple months, there's also been some really interesting work on relays and that came out of Mandiant. So I'm going to point at Chris in the back. But a lot of the asset owners didn't even register that was happening because they were so busy running after the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that we've seen in these stories that they aren't seeing the things where we're actually like, no, this is actually a big issue. Like, you guys need to do something. Like, but inverters. We're like, oh, God. So we do have concerns. We want people to deal with them appropriately and prioritize. And messaging what you actually think can happen is really important. And that, I think I am going to close there because I think I've managed to give an entire presentation without slides, and I'm kind of proud of myself right now. So thank you. Thank you.